The thing about being invisible at Kidris Academy was that you had to work at it. Invisibility at an institution full of people who had been selected for their capacity to notice things was not a passive state. It was a practice, maintained through a specific combination of positioning, timing, and the cultivation of a personal profile so aggressively unremarkable that the noticing faculties of your classmates slid over you like light over still water and found nothing to hold on to. Solon Vray had been practicing invisibility for 7 months and had become, in his own assessment, moderately excellent at it. The cafeteria was the key. He had mapped, in his first week, the social topology of the Kidris cafeteria with the methodical attention of someone for whom understanding an environment was the first step toward not being consumed by it. Table positioning mattered. Arrival timing mattered. The section near the secondary food dispensary had a natural acoustic shadow created by the ventilation housing overhead, which reduced ambient noise by approximately 30%, and more usefully, reduced the likelihood of being drawn into conversations by approximately the same margin. He ate there every day. No one had remarked on it. This was, in the 7 months accounting, a success. The success was not complete. Completeness was at an institution where 31 civilizations had deposited their most exceptional young people, probably not achievable. There were always the ones who noticed anyway, who saw the practiced unremarkableness and found it, paradoxically, more interesting than the students who performed their exceptionalism visibly and loudly, and with the specific confidence of people who had been told, by someone official, that they were exceptional. Zara Neth was one of the ones who noticed. Zara Neth was, more precisely, the one who noticed and had opinions about it, and delivered the opinions with the scientific detachment of someone describing a specimen, which was what made it worse than if she had simply disliked him. The Delvari were regarded across the sector as the most intellectually and psychically gifted civilization in mapped space, which was a reputation they had earned and which they carried with the particular quality of people who do not need to perform their confidence, because the confidence is structural. Zara had the bearing of someone who had been exceptional since before she understood what the word meant, and had integrated this into her understanding of herself so completely that it was no longer a thing she was aware of. It was simply how the world was organized, with her at the natural center of its intellectual architecture. She sat 3 rows ahead of him in advanced energy systems. She turned around to look at him occasionally, in the way of someone checking a data point rather than engaging with a person, and the checking had produced, over 7 months, a series of public observations that were accurate in their content and excruciating in their delivery. "Your resonance output is below the first-year threshold," she had said, in week 2, during a class exercise in which students demonstrated their ability to interact with basic energy fields. She said it in the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting a calibration result. Around them, students from 12 different civilizations had looked at Solon with the expressions of people witnessing a data point being confirmed. "That's consistent," Solon had said, which was the answer that contained no available surface for the conversation to continue from, and which he had delivered with the composure of someone who had decided that composure was the only response to public assessment that did not make things worse. It was accurate what she said. His resonance output was below the first-year threshold. His scores across every assessed category at Kidris were in the middle range, not failing, not remarkable, present in the data the way background noise was present in a clean signal. He had been admitted to Kidris through a process he had never fully understood, on the basis of an assessment he had not been shown the results of, by people who had not explained their reasoning. The admission letter had said that the assessment indicated exceptional potential. 7 months of classes had not produced evidence in support of this claim. He had a private record, a document he kept on his personal tablet, not to be shown to anyone, in which he noted his observations about Kidris and its population with the specific thoroughness of someone who, in the absence of being able to demonstrate anything, could at least understand everything. It was a good record. It contained, among other things, a subsection on Zara Neth's observational patterns that he had filed under things he was not examining too closely, which was also where he had filed the reason he was at Kidris, and the feeling he had occasionally, not often, but occasionally in the specific way of a feeling that arrives and departs without explanation, that the measurements being applied to him were the wrong measurements. He could not have said what the right measurements were. He knew only what the feeling was, which was the sense of a capacity that had no instrument calibrated to find it. In the Advanced Energy Systems class on a Tuesday in the 7th month, Professor Dane set up the stellar resonance model, a miniaturized simulation of stellar energy dynamics, approximately the size of a large book, that generated controlled fluctuations in a contained field and responded to the energy interactions of the students who engaged with it. The exercise was to sustain a stabilizing interaction with the model for 30 seconds, demonstrating basic energy management capacity. Every student in the class could do this. Some of them could do significantly more than this. The model's fluctuations responded to Solon Briveth, a Theric student, with such enthusiasm that Professor Dane had to recalibrate the containment field. Zara's interaction produced a cascading resonance pattern that the model required 4 minutes to process. Solon put his hand near the model. The model did nothing. More precisely, the model's active fluctuations, which had been running at their standard operational frequency, subsided. Not dramatically, not with any visible effect. The readout that Professor Dane was monitoring at the front of the room showed the fluctuation metrics declining, smoothly and without drama, toward their lowest values, and staying there for the full 30 seconds of Solon's engagement, and returning to normal operational frequency when he withdrew his hand. What the class saw was nothing. What the class heard from the readout was silence, because the model's feedback tone, calibrated to provide auditory confirmation of an active energy interaction, produced no sound. "The model doesn't appear to be responding to you," Zara said, from 3 rows ahead, with the tone of someone confirming an expected result, which suggests either a malfunction in the model or a functional deficit in the student. She tilted her head. Given that the model worked for everyone else, the variable is likely the student. The class registered this with the specific social response of a group of exceptional young people encountering a data point that confirms their existing understanding of the world's organization. Not unkind, exactly, just confirmatory. Solon withdrew his hand from the model. He noted, in the private record of his mind rather than the physical one, that something had happened that he could not describe and did not have the vocabulary for: a sensation of resolution, like a held breath released, like a frequency finding its ground, and that the sensation had corresponded precisely with the model's silence. He did not know what this meant. He filed it under things he was not examining too closely. "You're probably right," he said, and made the response produce no available surface for the conversation to continue from, and attended the rest of the class with the composure of someone who has decided that composure is the only available response to the world as currently organized. Professor Dane reviewed the sensor logs after class with the routine attention of a teacher completing administrative tasks, and the routine attention lasted approximately 90 seconds before it became something else. He reviewed Solon's log 3 times. He opened a secondary analysis window and ran the fluctuation metrics through a comparison framework. He closed the secondary window, opened it again, ran the comparison again. He sat for a moment with the specific quality of a person who has found something in a dataset that the dataset was not supposed to contain and is confirming, with the methodical care of someone who cannot afford to be wrong, that it is actually there. It was actually there. The stellar resonance model's fluctuation metrics during Solon's 30-second engagement had declined from their operational frequency to their theoretical minimum, the lowest possible energy state, which the model was not designed to reach and which required, under standard physical frameworks, an energy input of a specific magnitude and type to achieve. The model had achieved it without receiving any detectable energy input. The metrics showed the decline, the 30-second maintenance, and the return to operational frequency, all of it smooth and without artifact, all of it consistent with a stabilization event rather than a malfunction. He called the stellar physicist first, because the stellar physicist was the person he had known longest, and because the stellar physicist's reaction, which was immediate, precise, and ended with the words "this should not be physically possible," confirmed that he had read the log correctly. He called the xenobiological energy researcher second, because the researcher's field was the intersection of biological systems and energy dynamics, and because the researcher's reaction, which involved a detailed series of questions about the student's species, age, previous assessments, and the exact parameters of the sensor array, confirmed that the biological explanation was not immediately dismissible. He called the theoretical framework specialist third, because the specialist's work 30 years of research into a model of dormant cross-species biological capacity that most of her peers considered interesting, and none of them considered empirically relevant, was the only existing framework in which what the sensor log showed was not impossible. The specialist's reaction was 47 seconds long and ended with, "Do not tell anyone else yet. Run the secondary diagnostics, then call me back." Dane ran the secondary diagnostics. They took 2 days, during which Solon attended classes, ate in his acoustic shadow section of the cafeteria, and made observations in his private record about the social dynamics of Kidris Academy. The observations included, that week, a note about the subsection on Zara Neth's observational patterns. Specifically, a new entry noting that her pattern of looking at him had, in the 7 months of his cataloging, never produced the conclusion that she was looking at him for the reasons people usually looked at other people. She was looking at him the way she looked at the stellar resonance model, with the focused attention of something that did not match her framework and that she intended to understand. He filed this under things he was not examining too closely and went to sleep. The secondary diagnostics confirmed the primary. They also produced a new data point that Dane read the following evening with the quality of a man whose understanding of his own professional life is being restructured as he reads. The stabilization effect was not limited to the stellar resonance model. It was present in the passive environmental sensors of the classroom, extending 2 meters in every direction from Solon's recorded position, a field of resolved energy states that corresponded exactly with Solon's 7 months of class attendance at Kidris. Every room he had sat in, every corridor he had walked through. The stabilization effect had been there continuously at low intensity in every space he had occupied since his arrival. He had been stabilizing everything around him for 7 months, not dramatically, not visibly, in the way that a very calm presence stabilizes a room, except that this was not metaphorical. It was the actual physics of a system, continuously resolving ambient energy fluctuations to their lowest states in a 2-meter radius around a 16-year-old human boy who was eating in the acoustic shadow section of the cafeteria and practicing invisibility. Dane called the theoretical framework specialist back. "Is he in any danger?" Dane said. "Not from the capacity itself," the specialist said. "From the people who will want to understand it, test it, and use it potentially." She paused. "I need to be in the room when you talk to him." "He doesn't know," Dane said. "I assumed," she said. "People usually don't with dormant capacities. The not knowing is part of the dormancy." Another pause. "How old is he?" 16. The specialist was quiet for a moment that had texture. "All right," she said. "Let me book passage." The Thursday began ordinarily, which was Solon's first indication that it was going to be the kind of Thursday that demonstrated why he had developed a specific relationship with the day. He ate breakfast in the acoustic shadow section. He attended his morning classes with the composure of someone for whom morning classes had become, across 7 months, a managed environment. He was in the corridor outside the Advanced Theoretical Physics seminar, 17 minutes before it was scheduled to begin, reviewing the day's reading on his tablet, when the station's emergency notification system activated. The notification was in the measured, calibrated tone of a system that had been designed to communicate urgency without producing panic. And it communicated, in that measured tone, that the station was experiencing a buffer array cascade failure, and that the emergency response team was activating, and that all students and staff should remain in their current locations pending further instruction. Solon looked at the notification. He looked at the corridor. He put his tablet in his bag. He knew about the buffer array because he had read the station's systems documentation in his first month. In the methodical way, he had applied to understanding every environment he occupied, and the buffer array was the system that maintained the station's orbital stability by managing the low-level stellar energy fluctuations that would otherwise, over time, degrade the platform's position. A cascade failure in the buffer array was the kind of failure that had a timeline, and the timeline was not long, and at the end of it, 1,200 people on an orbital platform had a problem that the problem's own timeline made difficult to solve. His personal tablet registered a call from Professor Dane. He answered it. Dane spoke with the compressed honesty of a situation that had run out of time for its own complexity. He said what the sensor logs showed. He said what the theoretical framework specialist believed it meant. He said what was happening to the buffer array and what would happen in approximately 40 minutes if the buffer array's cascade failure continued. He said, "I think you should know this." He did not say what Solon should do with the knowing because he did not know, and the honesty of not knowing was the most useful thing he could offer. "Which level is the central energy hub?" Solon said. Dane told him. Solon ended the call. He stood in the corridor for a moment, not because he was uncertain, but because the moment before you commit to a direction is worth occupying fully, because it is the last moment of the before, and the before is not recoverable once you have moved through it. He thought about the sensation in the Advanced Energy Systems class, the feeling of resolution, the held breath released, the frequency finding its ground. He thought about 7 months of practicing invisibility and the specific feeling, occasional but persistent, that the measurements being applied to him were the wrong measurements. He started walking toward the central energy hub. He walked with the unhurried pace of someone who has decided and is now doing, which is a different pace from both urgency and calm and which communicates, to anyone watching, either that the walker doesn't understand the situation or that the walker understands it completely. The 3 people who saw him in the corridor and knew about the cascade failure followed him, because the walk was the kind of walk that you follow without entirely knowing why you are following it. Zara Neth was one of them. She had been in the adjacent seminar room when the emergency notification activated, and she had been at the corridor window when Solon passed, and she had watched him walk with the quality of someone who has been studying an anomaly for 7 months, and has just observed the anomaly doing something that none of her framework predicts, and that her instincts, which were extraordinary, were telling her to pay attention to. She followed without deliberating about following, which was, for a Delvari, the most significant possible indication that something real was happening. The central energy hub was on the station's core level, a large, humming space where the buffer array's main management systems were housed, currently staffed by 3 emergency technicians who were working with the specific focused desperation of people who understand a timeline and are watching it elapse. The cascade failure's accumulated destabilization was visible on every display in the room, the metrics climbing in the steady, inexorable way of systems that have passed the point of self-correction. Solon walked to the center of the room. He stood there, he did not touch anything. He did not perform anything. He stood with the quality of someone who is simply present, fully, without reservation, without the practiced invisibility. And the sensation that arrived was the same one that had arrived in the Advanced Energy Systems class, but not small. Not contained to a 2-meter radius. Not the low-intensity background hum of 7 months of walking through corridors and eating in acoustic shadows. The held breath. The frequency finding its ground. The cascade failure's metrics. The accumulated destabilization. The climbing instability indices. The buffer array's cascading failure began to decline. Not quickly. Not dramatically. System by system, fluctuation by fluctuation, with the smooth and unremarkable quality of energy states deciding, in the presence of something that understood them, to resolve. The technicians watched their displays with the expression of people who are watching something happen that they have no framework for, but are not going to question the happening of because the happening is the correct direction. 23 minutes. The metrics reached their stable baseline. The cascade failure's accumulated destabilization resolved. The station held. Zara stood at the entrance to the hub and watched Solon stand in the center of it and do something that her 7 months of assessment had told her was not possible, and that her Delvari instincts, which were the most finely calibrated perceptual instruments in the sector, had just told her was real. She watched him stand with his eyes open, and his posture unremarkable, and the room stabilizing around him in the way of a system that has found its resolution. And she filed. In the section of her mind that she used for things that required reassessment rather than confirmation, every observation she had ever made about Solon Vray, reclassifying them one by one from anomaly to architecture, from a data point that didn't fit to a structure that the data points she had been using were too small to contain. The sensor logs transmitted automatically. By then, Solon had walked back to the cafeteria and eaten lunch in his acoustic shadow section, because it was lunchtime and lunch was a manageable thing, and the manageable things were worth maintaining when the unmanageable things had been as unmanageable as the morning. The 48 hours after the hub were the last 48 hours in which eating in the acoustic shadow section of the cafeteria was a viable strategy. The sensor logs from the hub reached the sector authority in 6 hours. The sector authority contacted the Accord's Scientific Council in 18. The Scientific Council contacted 7 additional research institutions and 2 governmental bodies in 24. By the 48th hour, the Kidris Academy director had received 12 formal inquiries. The Accord's Security Division had begun the process of dispatching a protection detail, and Solin's personal tablet had registered 47 communication requests from addresses he did not recognize and had not responded to any of them. The director's conversation with Solin, which occurred in her office, which he had been to once before in 7 months, and which was significantly more comfortable than the places where official conversations usually happened, was the first time, in Solin's experience of Kidris, that an official conversation had proceeded on the assumption that he was the relevant person in the room rather than the subject of discussion about the room. She told him what the Scientific Council's assessment indicated, what the Security Division's assessment indicated, and what the Academy's position was, which was that his welfare and his agency in determining his own next steps were their primary concern. He listened with the quality of attention he brought to things that mattered and asked, when she had finished, one question: "What does the theoretical framework specialist think?" The director looked at him. "She thinks," she said carefully, "that you have been doing it your whole life without knowing it, that the dormancy is the condition and the capacity is what you actually are." She paused. "She also thinks that the galaxy is going to have a great many opinions about what that means, and that the most important thing is for you to develop your own opinion first." Solin nodded. He had been developing his own opinion in the private record for 7 months, in the section filed under things he was not examining too closely. He thought it might be time to examine them. The news reached the wider galaxy in the specific way of unprecedented things that are immediately comprehensible to anyone with the context to understand them. First the stellar physics community, then the political community, then the general population, then the specific and highly motivated subset of the general population that had reasons to want to locate the most significant individual in the known galaxy for purposes that were not academic. The Accord's Security Division described these purposes with the careful language of people who did not want to produce alarm and were producing alarm anyway, because the careful language was describing the kind of interested parties that careful language exists to obscure. The protection detail was scheduled to arrive in 47 hours. Zara Neth made her decision in 46. It was not a simple decision. The Delvari did not make decisions without full assessment of the available information, and the available information included her family's senior counsel's position, which was that the situation required careful management, and that Zara's personal involvement was not the appropriate form of management. She heard this position with full attention and delivered her counterposition with the precision and authority of someone who had been exceptional since before she understood what the word meant, and who had, over the past 48 hours, added to her comprehensive understanding of the world a fact that had restructured its architecture. She had spent 7 months being the person who delivered public assessments of Solin Vray's deficits, and she had been accurate, and she had been incomplete, and the incomplete part was the entire thing. She found him in the cafeteria. He was in his section, the acoustic shadow section, the secondary food dispensary quadrant, the table that had been his for 7 months because he had mapped the social topology of the cafeteria in his first week and selected the optimal position. He was eating with the composure of someone for whom the world has recently become significantly more complicated and who has decided that lunch is manageable and is therefore managing it. She sat across from him. She did not perform sitting down, she sat, with the Delvari directness that did not apologize for itself. She looked at him with the fully forward ears of genuine attention and the expression of someone who has completed a reassessment and is prepared to deliver it. "I said things about you in class," she said, "that were accurate and incomplete. I would like to correct the incomplete part." He looked at her. His composure was the same composure he had maintained for 7 months, the practiced unremarkableness that the social topology of Kidris had required, and that had turned out to be, she now understood, the wrong category for what it actually was. It was not practiced unremarkableness. It was the quality of someone who had been doing the most significant thing in the room for 7 months without anyone, including himself, understanding that he was doing it. "I am also going to be here," she said, "between you and everyone who now knows what you are until you decide what you want to do about what you are." She paused. The protection detail arrives in 47 hours. I will be here in 46. Another pause, shorter, carrying the weight of something that had cost her something to produce. I am aware that this does not compensate for 7 months of being the person who laughed. She stopped,